Buongiorno everybody and welcome! Thank you for taking the time to come here all the way despite the late hour. You must be so tired of all this identity. So I'll try to keep you alive. And I know it's not easy. And today we are going to talk about the verifiable credential for the identity practitioner. It's such an important topic. Like you look at this agenda, it's full of verifiable credentials. And it is indeed important, it's not just hype, but whenever you hear, not whenever, but very often, when you hear a presentation about the verifiable credentials, you very often hear pretty puzzling statements. Things to the effect of centralized databases for credentials will disappear, or applications will be physically prevented from saving information about the user. And extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. But usually, never mind, that's me. Whenever I go to one of those presentations, very often the way in which it goes down is similar to this meme, which I don't know if you are familiar with. It's like the classic how to draw meme, in which there are only two steps. One step is like, okay, you want to draw a wolf, here is how you do the silhouette, and the next step is the entire thing. It's not very helpful. And in those presentations, you often have one slide that says centralized databases are bad. And the second slide is 169 methods for did. It's like how one helped the other. It's very, very mysterious. So today, I decided that as identity practitioners, we cannot accept just as an article of faith things. So I will do something very ambitious, especially at 6:52. Did you have your coffee? I'm having my coffee. You'll need it. I want to derive from what every identity practitioner is supposed to know, how at least a vague idea, a simplified idea of how verifiable credentials work. And then once we achieved that knowledge, we will go back to those statements and evaluate whether they have merit, if they don't have merit, and so on and so forth. Okay? If anyone disagrees, we're like 1, 2, 3, 4 doors. So if there are so many other sessions with people with less accent that you can attend. So here, very, very important disclaimer, I'm talking for myself, and I'm not representing the view of any company. It's important to mention this so that people don't come after me. But one thing that I want to clarify is, no surprise, I will poke some holes into some of those ideas today, but that doesn't mean I don't believe in the technology. I don't believe in the hype. I don't believe in adopting a technology with the wrong expectations, because that sets you to fail. So I don't want to sell verifiable credentials. I want to use verifiable credentials to do the things that today are hard to do with existing technology. And that is not some of the grand proclama that you often hear in this space. Also, I have a light exactly in front of me, and I cannot see anything at all. So this is your chance to do gestures, and I'll never know. Very good. I will start by telling you that you have been lied to. And fun fact, maybe I was one of the people lying to you. It's actually pretty likely. You've been lied to because go back to when you first learned about claims-based identity. You probably got a variant of this metaphor, in which you say, okay, claim-based identity is very easy. Here is how it works. There's a user, which have a drinking habit. There is a seller that sells wine. And how does this transaction goes down? User goes to the wine store, produces a document which comes from some trusted entity, a government, and liver disease is behind the corner. That's how identity works, right? No, it is not. There are very important differences. In fact, here, let's just pick OpenID because someone would be unseemly. But here, OpenID, let's say that we do the same online. And here is a relying party that sells wine. First, I try to get to this relying party, and I get redirected to my OpenID provider with some information saying, hey, I am client X. This user wants this list of scopes, if I'm also doing some authorization. And I get an artifact tailored to this very transaction, to me as a user, to the identity provider, to this particular relying party. I present, of course, this thing, because it's called ID token. Don't worry about the content. You'll see in a moment why I added it in there. And then the outcome is, again, our habit haunts us also online. So clearly, this is very different. This is very different because in real life, you don't pick up the phone and say, hey, government agency, I'm about to buy wine. And maybe there is a clerk in a different time zone that wakes up and says, okay, please, tell me the client ID. Okay, so what other scope you need? Okay, the age, yeah, here, let me send you. Not at all. Like, it wouldn't work. It would not scale. It would not be very convenient. That's not how this works. But the point here is, I think it's important, don't let anyone shame you for the fact that the identity, traditional identity, works this way. It works exactly as intended. The scenarios that we deal with today require having a centralized place where you run authorization logic, where you run business logic, where you custom tailor this token for the scenario, because we can afford it in the business scenarios, and because you have all those capabilities. So this thing is by design. So it was a lie, it's true, but it was a white lie. Like, it's not a very consequential lie. It's like for the purpose of helping people wrap their head around this. Well, what if? What if we have like a free afternoon and we say, well, you know what, let's recreate online the thing that we can do offline. The first thing we need to do in order to modify what we already have and get the behavior closer to what happens online, offline, is to get rid of the audience. The audience is one element in the ID token which says this ID token was issued for this particular relying party. It is a security measure because if someone steals the token, then the blast radius of the token is contained. You can only mess with that particular relying party and nothing else. So if we want to behave like offline, we have to get rid of it. So that means that when we do our request for the OpenID provider, we don't specify which audience we want, and the OpenID provider has to be okay with it. Today it wouldn't, but smells with little modification. The other thing we need to do is to place this thing somewhere. If we don't want to have to call every time, we need to save this artifact, which now is quotes ID token, because it's no longer an ID token. We need to save it somewhere so that when we need it, we can use it without having to go to talk with anyone else. So great progress. And not that hard, right? Like, it seems pretty straightforward. But now what are we going to do about the security of this particular thing? As we said, the audience was useful, so we can't just get rid of it. So here there is a trick, which is an old trick, which we used for many years in identity, which is we can tie this particular artifact to the entity to which we issued it to. And we can give proof to the relying party to check whether, yes, the user was actually the user that was the legitimate recipient of that first issuance. And so basically what happens is that we add a key. It's 2 keys, but I only have 20 minutes, so I can't go too much into the details. Yeah, let's say one key, like public private key pair, and an identifier of this key. And let's say that when you ask for the token, you also specify the identifier of this key, which now ends up in the token, inside the signature of your issuer. And so now once you get this thing in here, I now have the same artifact as before, referencing one key that I can use. And so when I do my call, instead of presenting just the artifact I get, I sign that artifact with my key. And so now the recipient receives this thing, checks the signature of the element inside, say, yes, it's coming from the entity I trust, finds the reference to the key, use that reference to validate that the external signature was done by the same entity, done. if now someone steals that thing, they can only replay it. They cannot call anyone else. So we are back to where we were with audience, which is good. Now, here is one of the biggest misconceptions in the world of verifiable credentials. Today, when you use OpenID Connect, you have selective disclosure. That's to say that if you ask to the provider, please give me this subset of claims, if the provider supports that aspect of the protocol, they can do it. We don't need to wait for verifiable credentials to have selective disclosure. The challenge is relying parties don't like to ask for fewer data. They like to ask for everything. And so it's not like we have to wait for this new technology. We already have this feature, but now that we have this artifact cached on the client, we actually have a problem. We can no longer customize this thing because we get it issued once and then we are on our own. So there is some magic that is done at the cryptographic level, on which I will not go into the details of, like Brian this morning gave a great presentation on selective disclosure JOTs. Let's just say for our purposes that this magic allows us to do selective disclosure even with a cached artifact like this one. So, good. Okay, of course I'm skipping so many details, but my attempt is to help you understand the bigger lines. I'm not trying to give you a class in this. But actually the bad news aren't over. Someone before us invented verifiable credentials already. We didn't invent them now. And as it turns out, a lot of people. Like if you look at this space, there are so many entities that like to get their hand at trying to define this new thing. W3C created the first data model, but then DIF did this did thing. OpenID is now one of the most active in this area. ISO, of course, mobile driving license and equivalent. So a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And in fact, just to give you a feeling of the terminology here, actually, now I've been using terms from traditional IAM. Now I'm going to introduce the terms that they use, in particular W3C. The user is the holder. The thing that issues you the credential is, surprise, the issuer. And the relying party is the verifier. It's like, remember the mapping with the rows before, like there is no magic in those names. The thing that we get from the issuer is the verifiable credential, and the thing that we present is the verifiable presentation. And the act of doing so is doing a presentation. Also, there's this verifiable data registry, which is a bit of a magic entity, which is supposed to solve all the problems of establishing trust, finding keys for all the various entities. It's still a bit out of focus, so I won't spend much time on it. And now, if you overimpose on that diagram the various cooks and who did what, you see that, for example, the format of verifiable credential today, we have W3C that created the first data model, and then there's ISO, which is using other stuff for MDL, like CBOR and similar. If you look at the issuance, W3C has its own method. OpenID introduced OpenID for verifiable credential, which is issuance. If you look at the presentation, there is like DIDCOM from the ISO has its own presentation, but they also use OpenID for VP. So here, I'm just not going to go into the details. The thing that I want you to bring home is there is a lot of work in there that is being going. And so if you try to find your way through all those various specifications, it might be hard. So it's not you, it's them. So don't worry. I think that here, I'm biased because I'm on their board, but I think OpenID is doing really good work in here, in which it's actually taking some of the ideas from these other areas and it's coalescing them in some coherent paths. So watch this space. Someone surrendered. Yes, I know. She simulated the 10 because she doesn't have a tablet for 10. She looked like someone was pointing a gun at her. Okay, so now that we finally have an intuitive understanding of how verifiable credentials work, again, disclaimer, This is like an ultra primer. I left off so many details. Now we can go back and evaluate some of those fantastic claims about verifiable credentials. And I'm going to just limit myself to those three. One is centralized databases of credentials will disappear. The other is that users own their identity. This is what the marketing departments absolutely love. It's a beautiful message, but not entirely true. And then there is the improved privacy, which is the one that makes me foam every time I hear someone on stage saying that. Because they say it, and then it's like, they don't ever say how, which is like, I want to know. But we'll see, we'll see. Okay, let's think about the centralized databases will disappear. I start with the credentials, because that's usually what they start with. Like the first slide that they show is like, here there is a single point of failure. Like if a hacker attacks this thing, we are all in trouble. But luckily, this thing will make those databases disappear. Well, let's see. Let's imagine that I'm applying for a job, as it happened in the US. I'm from Italy. Did you notice my accent is from Italy? Okay, good. I know, it's very, barely noticeable. So I had to apply for that job, and that job required a master's degree, which I have two of. I know I don't look like. And so imagine that my university, the University of Genova, actually issues a verifiable credential for me, which says here he graduated. And say that I present this thing, and now like the verifier, like a new employer, checks this thing, say, okay, yeah, fine, works, good. So can now the university, be very careful with your answer, can now the university remove that stuff from their database? I cannot hear. I have a here in my... Oh, thank you. Like I'm putting so much energy in here. Please give me something back. Come on. Once I'm not paid. I didn't hear, but I have a feeling that it's best if I didn't. So no, absolutely not. I brought so many ice creams to German tourists in my little town in northern Italy to pay for my college, that absolutely this thing should never ever be deleted. Of course, like seriously. The university is what I like to call the natural source of truth for this information. There is no more authoritative source for that thing. They cannot remove it. There is no reason that is now introduced by the existence of the wallets for them to remove this. They can't. But now there is another database in that picture. The database is the one of a verifier. So what about the verifier? Today, without a verifiable credentials, I show up with a photocopy or a scan of my diploma. And that thing has so many things about me, not just my scores and similar. And so now with verifiable credential, potentially, I could give less information. Now, I don't know what things are in my diploma which I would hide from my prospective employer, but in general principle, you can. That's fine, but what about that information, the core information, which must be there? Can that, like the verifier, once it received that information, remove it? Ah, thank you. Suddenly, your glucose level, whoop, went up. Thank you. No, I don't think so, because like, imagine that I migrate to the United States, I get this job which requires a master's degree, which puts me in the fast lane for getting the green card, which is exactly what happened. And say that now I get myself in big trouble, which so far did not happen. And say that the FBI shows up and say, okay, did you do due diligence? Like you hired this guy 5 years ago, and now, thanks to you, is an American soil doing a mess. Did you do due diligence? Those guys cannot have a Boolean in their database saying, see this Boolean? 5 years ago, this Boolean was flipped to true once I checked the signature. It doesn't work that way. They need to keep all that information because it's not like magically, thanks to the fact that I have a wallet, now I'm able to do all of those changes. So, can't be done in there. And then just to go back in there, think of all the use cases in which you actually have the need to access stuff on the back end, offline. Like if I got in an accident and they need to know my blood type, they can't expect me to do my little biometric and consent to my, it's like, no, I want them to have access to that stuff as soon as possible. So databases, not great. I need to accelerate, I blabber too much. User is in control of their own identity. This one is also, frankly, not great. Say that I'm doing the scenario at the beginning in which I'm trying to buy alcohol. I need to prove my age. Say that I get my verifiable credential and I present it, and I proved my age. But say that last week I was driving drunk, or this week because it's Vegas, but don't drive in Vegas. I do not. The moment in which the inner thing is revoked, I can sign with my external key until I'm blue in the face, but the verifier will reject this, because in the end, I'm not sovereign. The issuer of my driving license is. It's the one that says, yes, I certify X. And if that guy doesn't want to certify, it basically, the relying party, the verifier will simply not accept this thing. The other part is whatever information I'm presenting in there, say that that token magically is backed to stuff on the blockchain. On the blockchain, I have the control to move access to my information so that when people try to read this thing on the blockchain, they get blocked. But it's enough to flash this information once to the verifier, but the verifier can save it. There is no magic, no quantum entanglement that will make their stuff disappear from their databases. And the last one, privacy will improve. Privacy will improve toward the issuer, because now the issuer doesn't know when and with whom I'm using my stuff. That is a net improvement. That's fantastic. I can now, sorry, the photographer was taking a picture. I can now actually use my company discount with the nightclub, and they will not know how often I do it. That's fantastic. But the thing is that think of today when a relying party tries to do high-value verification, like pictures of yourself with your driving license in the picture. Like that's a very complicated operation, which you only do when the business truly requires it. Imagine tomorrow you have the same level of verification at a tap. Just pull out your phone, Apple Wallet, tap, done, same level. If a relying party can ask for it, do you think they're not going to ask for it? Of course they're going to ask for it. And so what might happen if the issuers and the wallet builders are not careful is that the total amount of privacy in the universe will go down, because people will disclose the stuff more often and high-value stuff more often. So it's a danger. We need to be careful about it. It's not impossible to solve, but it definitely is a problem we don't have today. Almost done. So we need verifiable credentials to happen anyway. Like the things that I poked hole on right now are just how to say, let's call them what I believe are urban legends. Also, by the way, I'm open to people coming back and say, okay, you didn't get it. Here, there's the database that you'll delete. Please do it. If you actually have one database that you know that will be deleted for these, come finding and tell me. In the next version of the presentation, I'll change it. But so far, no one has done it. Nonetheless, we need verifiable credentials because they can do things that nothing else can do. One is we really do need, especially in the case of governments, to be able to exercise our identity as citizens without the government tracking where and how we do so. So for that reason alone, just for civil liberties, it's important to have this thing, and you cannot have it with older technology. The fact that we'll have in our pocket high assurance credentials can be a game changer. I will not do any specific examples because I don't want to be thrown out, but we are in Vegas, you can imagine. Think of the situations in which today you want to verify the age and you cannot because it's too expensive or people didn't sign up and similar. Now you'll be able to. It's fantastic. Or like in general, we will unlock scenarios that today are just impractical. And so, great. But then as an architect, this is my favorite, we'll be able to scale like crazy. Because if there is nothing that needs to be on and available and scaling once you receive your requests, sky is the limit. And in fact, to be honest, if we were to use a traditional technology, it would be very hard to achieve what we said, like reproducing what we said we want to do, as in the real world, in the digital world, doing what we do in the real world. So going back to my little analogy, my hope is that those 25 minutes, sorry, no time for questions, gave you a bit of a bridge between the starting point and those bigger claims. And yeah, if you wanted to ask questions, I'll be here, so I'll be happy to get it offline, but unfortunately, I already abused of your time. So, thank you.